Hey everyone! Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into one of the most important aspects of modern governance that affects billions of lives, constitutional law. More specifically, we're going to talk about Indian constitutional law and how it compares with the constitutional systems of other countries. India has the longest written constitution in the world, and it governs the largest democracy on the planet. But how does it work, and how does it compare with the constitutions of other countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, or South Africa? Stick around, and we'll unpack it all. Part 1. What is the Indian Constitution? First off, let's break down what we mean by the Indian Constitution. The Indian Constitution is the supreme law of the land. It came into effect on January 26, 1950, making India a sovereign, socialist, secular, and democratic republic. It's the longest written constitution in the world, with 448 articles, 12 schedules, and over 100 amendments. But what does all of this mean for everyday citizens? Well, the Constitution sets out how the Indian government should function, and more importantly, it guarantees fundamental rights to every citizen. So, let's start with a little history. Historical context: the making of the Indian Constitution. India's constitution was drafted by the Constituent Assembly, a body of representatives formed after independence from British rule in 1947. The assembly was chaired by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, one of the most influential figures in Indian legal history. It took nearly 3 years to complete the document, which was heavily influenced by a variety of sources, including the British system of parliamentary government, the U.S. Constitution's principles of federalism, and even the French ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The preamble to the Indian Constitution is very telling. It says India is a sovereign, independent in its own affairs; socialist, aiming for social and economic equality; secular, meaning no state religion; and democratic republic, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. This preamble reflects the core values that guide Indian democracy. Part 2. Key features of the Indian Constitution. Now that we've covered the basics, let's dive into some of the most important features of the Indian Constitution. 1. Federalism with a strong center. India is a federal country, meaning there's a division of powers between the central government and the state governments. But, unlike the U.S. federal system where the states have considerable autonomy, India's federalism leans toward a strong central government. This means that while states have their own legislatures and courts, the central government holds a significant amount of power, especially in matters like defense, foreign affairs, and finance. In times of emergency, the Constitution allows the central government to take control over state governments through a concept called President's Rule. 2. Parliamentary system. India follows the parliamentary system of government, much like the United Kingdom. This means that the executive branch, the Prime Minister and Council of Ministers, is directly accountable to the legislature, or parliament. The Lok Sabha, House of the People, and Rajya Sabha, Council of States, form the bicameral legislative body, which passes laws and holds the executive accountable. In this system, the Prime Minister is the head of government, but the President of India is the ceremonial head of state. 3. Fundamental rights and duties. One of the most crucial sections of the Indian Constitution is Part 3, which deals with fundamental rights. These are similar to the Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution and include right to equality, Article 14, right to freedom, Article 19, right to freedom of religion, Article 25, and right to constitutional remedies, Article 32, which allows citizens to approach the Supreme Court if their rights are violated. Interestingly, the Constitution also lists fundamental duties under Part 4A, added by the 42nd Amendment in 1976. While fundamental rights are enforceable in court, duties are more like moral obligations for citizens. 4. Directive Principles of State Policy. Another unique feature is the Directive Principles of State Policy, DPSP, found in Part 4. These aren't enforceable in court, but they serve as guidelines for the government to create policies aimed at social justice and the welfare of the people. For example, the DPSPs advocate for things like free legal aid, equal pay for equal work, and the promotion of the welfare of children. Even though they aren't legally binding, these principles guide Indian policymakers in shaping laws that promote equality and social welfare. 5. Amendment process, flexibility and rigidness. One more important feature is the amendment process. While the Indian Constitution is quite rigid in some respects, it's also flexible enough to adapt to changing times. Article 368 outlines the procedure for amending the Constitution, and so far, there have been more than 100 amendments. For example, the 42nd Amendment in 1976 made sweeping changes during the emergency era, which emphasized the role of the central government. Later, the 44th Amendment undid many of these changes after democracy was restored. This balance between flexibility and rigidity is crucial because it allows the Constitution to evolve over time without losing its core principles. Part 3, Comparative Constitutional Law. How does India's constitution compare? Now let's take a quick look at how the Indian constitution stacks up against other countries' constitutions. What makes India's constitution unique, and what do we share with the rest of the world? 1. India versus United States, Federalism and Rights. The US and India both operate as federal systems, but there are some key differences. For instance, US federalism gives much more power to the states, while India's system, as I mentioned earlier, is more centralized. In the US, each state has significant autonomy in areas like criminal justice, education, and healthcare, whereas in India, the Union List gives the central government authority over most significant areas. When it comes to rights, both countries place a lot of importance on individual freedoms. However, the Indian Constitution includes a broader set of rights, such as the right to education, added by the 86th Amendment in 2002, which isn't explicitly guaranteed in the US Constitution. 2. India versus United Kingdom, Unwritten Constitution. Unlike India, the United Kingdom doesn't have a single written constitution. Instead, it relies on a combination of statutes, court judgments, conventions, and historical documents like the Magna Carta. Despite not having a written constitution, the UK has a well-functioning democratic system. However, this flexibility sometimes leads to a lack of clear boundaries between the powers of the government and the rights of individuals. In contrast, India's written constitution clearly defines the powers of each branch of government, individual rights, and the amendment process. 3. India versus South Africa, Rights and Social Justice. South Africa's 1996 constitution is often hailed as one of the most progressive in the world, particularly because of its emphasis on human rights and social justice. Much like India, South Africa's constitution was born out of a struggle, in this case, the fight against apartheid. One major similarity is the strong protection of fundamental rights. South Africa's Bill of Rights includes rights to housing, healthcare, food, water, and social security. India's directive principles of state policy aim at similar social and economic goals, but unlike South Africa's, they aren't enforceable by courts. 4. India versus France, Secularism. Both India and France are secular states, meaning they don't endorse any official religion. However, the approach is slightly different. In India, secularism means the state respects all religions equally and doesn't interfere in religious affairs unless necessary for social reform. In contrast, France follows a strict form of secularism called laïcite, which demands a complete separation between religion and public life. This difference leads to contrasting legal frameworks, like India allowing personal laws for different religious communities, whereas France has laws banning religious symbols in public spaces. Part 4, Modern Constitutional Challenges in India and Around the World. Constitutions aren't just historical documents, they're living, breathing frameworks that adapt to new challenges. So, what are some of the current challenges facing constitutional law, both in India and worldwide? 1. Freedom of speech and the Internet. One major issue today is freedom of speech in the digital age. In India, Article 19 guarantees freedom of speech and expression, but with reasonable restrictions for things like public order and national security. The rise of social media has complicated this, with debates around hate speech, misinformation, and government control of online platforms. The US faces similar challenges with its First Amendment, but the debate there often revolves around the role of private companies like Twitter and Facebook. 2. Privacy and surveillance. In India, privacy was declared a fundamental right in the landmark Puttaswamy v. Union of India case in 2017. This ruling came in response to concerns over the Aadhaar system, a biometric database that raised questions about government surveillance and the protection of personal data. Similarly, countries around the world are grappling with the balance between national security and individual privacy, particularly as new technologies emerge. 3. Constitutional amendments and democratic integrity. Finally, constitutional amendments remain a hot topic in many countries. In India, some critics argue that frequent amendments could undermine the integrity of the constitution. Meanwhile, in countries like the US, it's incredibly difficult to amend the constitution, which can make it harder to adapt to modern issues like campaign finance reform or gun control. Around the world, balancing democratic flexibility with constitutional stability is a challenge every country faces. Conclusion: why constitutional law matters globally. So there you have it, a deep dive into the Indian Constitution and how it compares with other countries. Whether it's guaranteeing rights, defining government powers, or adapting to modern challenges, constitutional law is the foundation of how societies operate. Understanding your constitution isn't just for lawyers or politicians, it's for everyone. It affects how governments treat citizens, what rights you have, and how justice is served. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how the Indian Constitution compares with others and which issues you think are the most important today. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.